Hello again, cadre. As you can tell, I'm in the mode of doing videos right now, and I want to get as many done as I possibly can so that you have access to these before our next class session. If you refer to the PowerPoint slides that we had, the Google slides that we had for our April session, and you look on page 13, 14, and 15, you're basically going to see most of what I'm going to talk about in terms of a visual. There's a couple of points that I think need to be made about policy and politics, and one, that in policy and politics, the hardest thing I think for people to get used to, particularly leaders that are out there in the policy and politics of a faculty, of a school district and employees, of a public, parents, and so on, because politics is not just about the legislature and the board. It is about any issue for which there's more than one opinion, one side, that kind of thing. In other words, there's a constant swirl that's going on in terms of policy and politics, and it looks like an infinity loop. And you all are familiar with an infinity loop. If not, here's an example of one if I can get it out in front of there. That basically just is a continuous looping process, and what it does is there's a loop that goes from the inside of the school, policy, politics, and leading in the school, over to the outside, the community, excuse me, outside, including the community, whatever community may happen to mean, and it just keeps going back and forth. As things swirl inside the system, they tend to get out into the community. As things in the community tend to swirl, they find their way into the school. And this is just the nature of the way it is. For example, the legislature's talking about vouchers in charter schools, particularly charter schools. Well, that swirl that's outside right now is affecting the swirl that's inside, because there are educators who have very strong feelings about that, one way or the other. There are educators who feel like that's a slap in the face to a professional educator to even think about there ought to be alternatives and so forth. And yet there are those folks in the profession who believe in parent choice, and charter schools and vouchers are one way to advance parent choice. Not here to take an opinion on that or a poll on that at this point in time. But the point of it is if you're going to lead, you got to deal with the policy and the politics. Remember, policy being the affairs of the people, politics being the difference in the ideas, and this constant swirling between the school or the system and the community. And the swirling process makes it a systems kind of process that you got to link the two together. And a leader, and I don't care whether you're a principal, you're a coordinator, you're the superintendent, if you intend to lead policy and politics, you've got to stand right in the center of where that swirl takes place. Because not only do you have to guide what's going on within the system, you have to have your ears to the ground and being an influence in what's going on outside the system. It's going to get windy there. It's hard to stand there. A lot of people just run like crazy to get away from that location, but a leader has to stand there. And a leader learns to do that, and do that in such a way that there's a confidence to doing that. There's a comfort to it. And they get just as comfortable with policy and politics as they are with curriculum instruction, with communication, with budget and finance, and buildings and grounds. It's simply just part of it. And so if we begin to think about the things that leaders do, curriculum instruction, personnel and evaluation, buildings and grounds, budget and finance, and so on, and add to that list policy and politics as if it's one of those major categories of what a leader does, I think we'd have a lot more comfort with it. And then I think simply understanding what it's all about and seeing a model like that infinity loop, to me, helps a great deal. Well, I think it's important to understand that in terms of leading politics, the role that most of the time you'll find yourself in, now this isn't always the case. We've had professionals who, by virtue of having a certain kind of kid in their classroom, by virtue of having something very unique happen in their community, have had the opportunity to be a catalyst for getting a proposal to the legislature and through the legislature to change things. And a good example, a number of years ago, the social studies class from Norfolk High School got to studying the issues of multicultural education. And really wanted to know why in the world we weren't doing multicultural education. My goodness, we'd had students of color, students from various countries for quite a long time, and it seemed to be something that was picking up steam. Now, this was 15 years ago or more. And so they got to discussing this to the point where the teacher simply said, well, why don't you put a legislative proposal together and let's take it down and see if we can get somebody in the legislature to run with this. And they did that. Met with senators, had several folks that were senators said, yes, I'll sign on to that, I'll be a sponsor of that bill. And one of the leading ones, of course, was Senator Chambers. He had a long-standing interest in the issue of schools being required to be more multicultural, particularly in the things that they taught and the way that they dealt with kids and that kind of thing. So, but basically, the idea, or what was the response of the policymakers to the students was, this is probably something that's going to take more than 1 year to get through the legislature, because typically ideas that are fairly radical, like this one is they have to kind of get used to it. It's like putting your toe in a hot water bathtub or cold water lake or something. It takes a while to get used to that, and that logically the best thing would be is that the legislature would assign this to an interim study, which over the summer then there'd be a study about multicultural education and so forth, and that they promised that these students would be involved in it. I didn't think it had a chance of passing that first time. Knew it had a very good chance after 1 year. People would come to understand, yeah, we've got to do this kind of thing. But it got to the floor of the legislature so fast it made people's heads swim. First day they voted on it, I think there was maybe 1 or 2 dissenting votes kind of thing. The last time it was voted on, it was 49, I think, to nothing. Or 45 to nothing, with 4 abstaining or being absent. Anyway, it was a unanimous passing all in that first year, and of course everybody was rather stunned. Now what do we do? We have this new law called multicultural education, and it's what's now in Rule 10 over multicultural education, teaching about the cultures and language and customs of those 4 multicultural kind of groups. That's the conclusion of this video. There will be a couple of more to come relative to how do leaders influence or lead policy. And I think the question or the point, and I'll make it now so that you can give some thought to it. Leaders don't necessarily lead the political side of it, but they influence the political side. And how that happens is be the topic of our next video.